So it was very difficult leaving Supertramp and giving Supertramp to Rick, the name. Probably one of the most foolish things I've ever done.
Back in Paris, 1979, Supertramp captured what may be one of the most unforgettable live records. Live in Paris was their coronation. Once a scrappy English band that struggled to afford meals is now reigning on the world stage. Yet, ironically, it's precisely their monstrous success, Breakfast in America, that planted the seeds of their downfall. Let's dive into the rise, zenith, and fall of Supertramp and how their greatest triumph quietly unraveled the band. The story kicks off in 1969 when Rick Davies and Roger Hodgson decided to team up. On the surface, they couldn't have been more different. Rick was a working-class kid who'd grown up playing blues and jazz on old pianos. Roger, on the other hand, came from a wealthy English family, went to boarding schools, and was classically trained on multiple instruments. One had grit and raw energy. The other had polish and melody. When they joined forces, the clash of backgrounds and personalities somehow worked. Rick leaned toward darker, bluesy, grounded songwriting, while Roger was all about dreaming melodic tunes with almost spiritual lyrics. It was a strange marriage, but it gave Supertramp a unique DNA right from the start. Roger put it later, Rick and I had a yin and yang polarity that really made for a very interesting dynamic. Supertramp's first two albums didn't connect with audiences at all. Supertramp from 1970 and Indelibly Stamped from 1971 both flopped commercially, despite a few good reviews. Financially, things were not great. They were barely scraping by, sometimes having trouble affording food. At that point, Supertramp was just another struggling prog rock outfit in a crowded field, and it wasn't clear whether they'd survive long enough to find their sound. By the early 1970s, Rick Davies and Roger Hodgson were still trying to figure out if Supertramp would even survive. The first two records had failed, and the dream of making it big seemed to be slipping away. Their big chance came when a young A&M Records executive, Dave Margerson, heard some of their new demos. Their albums hadn't accomplished much. I went to see them and liked them, especially the new songs. With financial backing, the band moved to a cottage in Somerset called Southcombe. For months in 1973 and 1974, they lived almost like a family, pouring everything into the material that would become the album, Crime of the Century. Even though Rick and Roger worked brilliantly in the studio, their personal connection was fading. There's a very deep bond, but it's definitely mostly on a musical level. When there's just the two of us playing together, there's an incredible empathy. His down-to-earth way of writing, which is very rock and roll, balances out my lighter, melodic style. Offstage, their lives were drifting in very different directions. They were already writing most songs separately, even if the credits continued to read Davies/Hodgson. Released in 1974, the album Crime of the Century finally gave them what they'd been chasing, a breakthrough. It climbed the UK charts, made a splash in North America, and gave Supertramp their first real hits with Dreamer and Bloody Well Right. For the first time, Rick and Roger were more than just struggling musicians, they were becoming stars. But success came with its own problems. The follow-up, Crisis, What Crisis?, was rushed between tours and leaned heavily on leftover material. The band never really loved it, though Roger would later call it his personal favorite.
Actually, Crisis for Crisis, funny enough, is my favorite album. And it didn't do as well because it did not have the hit single, but as a collection of songs, I love it.
Then, in 1977, came Even in the Quietest Moments. This was the album that gave the world Give a Little Bit, a song Roger had written as a teenager. The record proved their momentum wasn't slowing. hitting the charts worldwide and even going to #1 in Canada. By now, the band had moved permanently to Los Angeles. On the outside, Supertramp looked unstoppable. But inside, Rick and Roger were moving even further apart. And when they set out to record Breakfast in America, those cracks would turn into real fault lines. The whole process of crime was kind of us finding our feet as writers and as people. During that, we worked pretty closely together on School and Bloody Well Right in particular. From Crisis onward, we definitely wrote separately. It seemed that who we were as people became more defined. Although Rick Davies and Roger Hodgson were writing almost entirely on their own, they still tried to shape an album together. Their first idea was bold, a concept called Hello Stranger, where the songs would be a conversation between the two of them, two clashing worldviews face to face. Roger later admitted he loved the idea, because their differences were the engine of Supertramp. But the band decided to drop the heavy concept and go for something lighter. But that doesn't mean the task would be any easier. In a way, it's easier to write minor key opuses than a really good catchy pop song. That's not easy at all. The record itself was carefully crafted. They began with home demos, then cut more polished demos to nail down the arrangements. When they finally hit the Village Recorder in Los Angeles, the sessions stretched on for months. They even spent 1 week just trying to find the perfect sound setup. When it came time to mix, they struggled with overly harsh EQ on the console. Hodgson was so consumed by the deadline that he literally moved into a camper outside the studio, working 16 hours a day. After 2 months chasing the right mix, they finally decided to call it a wrap. Not because they were satisfied, but because time had run out. Musically, the album captured both sides of Supertramp. Davies opened it with Gone Hollywood, a gritty look at chasing fame in LA, while Hodgson closed it with Child of Vision, his reflection on materialism and maybe on Davies himself. In between came classics like The Logical Song, Goodbye Stranger, Take the Long Way Home, and the title track Breakfast in America, all glued together by their trademark Wurlitzer piano. Officially, every song was labeled Davies, Hodgson, but in truth, they wrote separately, and the balance of the record reflected their divide. On the surface, the sessions seemed harmonious. The engineers swore everyone was upbeat, but others remembered the pair barely talking beyond polite greetings. Roger later admitted that he often felt Rick disliked his songs, but kept quiet because he knew the rest of the band would back them. Whatever the reality, the result was magic. Breakfast in America, an album as catchy as it was carefully built, perfectly timed for the moment when progressive rock was fading and radio-friendly pop and punk rock were taking over. Breakfast in America launched Supertramp into superstardom. Released on March 16, 1979, it produced major hits, won Grammys, and topped Billboard for weeks. Worldwide sales were massive, but success seemed to be the only thing they shared. Bandmates barely spoke offstage. Hodgson later said that their lifestyles drove them apart, even though they seemed fine in the studio and on stage. The grueling Breakfast in America tour only widened that distance. The split became official after Famous Last Words, released in 1982, a record that never lived up to its name. It sold respectably, but compared to their previous triumph, it fell flat. The only real hit was Hodgson's It's Raining Again, a bright melodic tune that couldn't mask the fact that the band was running out of steam. When Hodgson left, he and Rick Davies made a deal meant to keep things fair. Davies would keep the Supertramp name, while Hodgson would keep the royalties for his songs. On paper, it sounded clean. In practice, it wasn't. Davies carried on with Supertramp, but he also kept playing Hodgson's hits. Songs like Give a Little Bit and The Logical Song, the very tracks that had defined Roger's voice and vision. To Roger, it felt like a betrayal of their agreement. That tension never really went away. Fans asked for reunions, promoters offered big money, but the trust between the two men was gone. If there is one reason Supertramp never got back together, in my opinion, it's probably that broken deal. Supertramp's golden run had ended, not with a spectacular fight, but with a slow drift apart. Hodgson walked away to chase his own music and a simpler life. Davies held on to the name, steering a different version of the band through the years. But the magic of Davies-Hodgson partnership, the push and pull that created those timeless songs, was gone. So that was my take on Breakfast in America by Supertramp. I love Supertramp. I've been planning to make a video about Supertramp for a while, and as a coincidence, the script for this video was pretty much done when the news that Rick Davies passed came out. It was a huge coincidence. I was supposed to shoot this video like 4 weeks ago, something like that, but my life's been so busy lately that I haven't had time to shoot this video. So I'm doing it right now. And it's going to be like a late tribute to Rick Davies. Anyway, I've been a Supertramp fan for a long time, and I'm not the biggest fan of their prog phase, but their blues pop era, absolutely brilliant. I love it. And I was lucky enough to see Roger Hodgson about 10 years ago, and it was one of the cleanest, best mixed shows I've ever heard in my entire life. And speaking of live sound, this is one of my favorite live records of all time. I love it. I love everything about it. And it was the very record that got me hooked on Supertramp. I remember perfectly the day I heard Bloody Well Right, one of Rick's songs, on this. I was like, oh my God, what's this? This is amazing. And from that moment, I became a fan. And I love everything about it. As I said, this cover is absolutely beautiful. I could hang this on the wall and it would be a beautiful decoration. I love everything about it, and I don't think I would be making this video if I hadn't listened to this record many years ago. I hope you have enjoyed the video, and if you did, please subscribe, like the video. Every support helps a lot. I put these videos together completely on my own, and it takes a ton of work to do so. So every bit of support is great. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.